a new definition of adulthood. Adulthood is everything that we do to cope with our childhood, right? Like that there was this moment in childhood where we're like, this isn't feeling good anymore. This, and sometimes for some of us really early and some of us a little bit later, but this hurts. I don't want to feel it anymore. And I would argue that's the point at which sort of adulthood begins, where we start to, instead of being who we are, we start trying to protect who we are.
I'd like to show you why knowing your why is the start of your journey. Without a strong why, it can be so difficult to reach your maximum potential. My name is Dr. Jason Ballara, and every week I meet with real estate investors and mindset specialists that are taking action in order to build a life according to their own terms. We will break down what drives successful people and allows them to achieve at such a high level. If you are a professional wanting to break through, or simply someone that wants to hear an inspiring story, the Know Your Why podcast is made for you.
Hi everyone, I'm Jason Ballara, and this is the Know Your Why podcast. Today I'm here with Dr. Kelly Flanagan. Dr. Flanagan is an author, speaker, personal growth and relationship coach, and licensed clinical psychologist. He blogs regularly at drkellyflanagan.com. His writing has been featured in Reader's Digest, Huffington Post, and The 5 Love Languages, and he has appeared on the Today Show with his daughter. I'm kind of excited to hear that story. So, Dr. Flanagan, first, let me just start by saying thank you. Thank you for coming on the show and being with us today. I really do appreciate you taking the time.
Yeah, it's an honor to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Can we start just with having you tell your story, tell your background, and then we'll kind of dive in from there?
Sure. Yeah. I've never told it this way, but when as we just chatted there briefly for a few minutes, you talked about the importance of helping everybody who's listening today get clearer and clearer about their why, right?
Yep.
And so I initially went to school to become a clinical psychologist, graduated with a PhD in clinical psychology, and if you'd have asked me at that point, I'd have told you my why was to help other people get healthier, that I was passionate about that. Um, Although I have a good friend who says that once you realize why you really became a clinical psychologist, you have to come up with a better reason. and so it turns out like it was theoretically this selfless thing, but really I was just trying to heal my own wounds and help other people heal theirs as well. And so started to realize that it's okay to be doing things for myself as well, to sort of be attracted to the things that I want to do in the world. As I started to heal, I started to get more connected with my intuition and my passions in that regard. And in about 2011, I decided I wanted to start writing. I had never done it in any sort of organized way, except for grades, throughout. But I'd always been interested in it. It had always been attractive to me. And so I started writing a blog. And about 9 blog posts into my blog, I wrote a blog post called Marriages for Losers, which went really viral. The idea was that if we're going to compete in marriage, we should be competing to see who can lose the most. And if there's a mutuality in that kind of culture in marriage, it becomes pretty powerful and beautiful. So that went really viral. And then I wrote a letter to my daughter about how she's inherently interesting, and her job in finding a lifelong partner is to find somebody who knows she's interesting, so she's not constantly having to prove it, right? And again, if there's a mutuality in that, it's a beautiful thing. That went really viral. But then I wrote a second letter to her and published it on my blog. It was called Words from a Father to His Daughter from the Makeup Aisle. And it was about how yes, she's beautiful on the outside, but her deepest and most enduring beauty is on the inside. And that went so viral that I was in my clinical psychology office one day, and I pick up the phone, and it's the Today Show. And they're like, hey, this letter of yours is amazing. Would you like to come out to the Today Show with your daughter and talk about it? So that was a surreal experience. It was getting like 2 million views a day or something like that. And then it was incredible. It was an incredible experience. So then I go on the Today Show and with Caitlin, and she's 3 at the time, so she's like lifting up her legs and showing her underwear to the world. But she did great, and I got connected with this incredible literary agent who said, "Hey, you should write a book, and these letters to your kids are going viral. you should probably write a parenting book. And I went home to my wife, who's the child psychologist, and said, hey, Kathy, my agent wants me to write a parenting book. And my wife's like, dude, you have no business writing a parenting book. And that was absolutely true, because everything I've really learned about parenting, I've learned from my wife, thankfully. So it got us talking though. It's like, okay, like I'm getting 100 emails a day from people around the world saying this letter that you wrote to your daughter. You know, I realized that the emails I was getting, they weren't saying I'm going to save this letter for my daughter, or I'm going to write a letter like it for my granddaughter, or anything like that. The emails were all saying the same thing. I still needed to hear these words. I needed to be reminded that I'm enough, that I'm worthy, that I'm not alone, that I belong, that I matter, that I have a reason for being here. And I'm like, wow, I'm writing a letter to my 3-year-old daughter, and grown men and women around the world are going, I still needed to hear these words. Like somehow those words got in and touched a part of me that still needed it. And I realized we've all got a little one inside of us still waiting on a love letter, right? There's this younger, wounded, needy part of us that is still looking to be assured of our worth. And this was like really foreign to me because I was a clinical psychologist, empiricist, scientist, inner child, what? But I sort of had to surrender to the truth of what the world was telling me, which is no, we've got this little kid inside of us that needs to be healed still. And that's really sort of set my work, my writing. I wrote a book called Lovable, Embracing What Is Truest About Us So We Can Truly Embrace Our Life. And it's really set my work and my sense of calling on the trajectory of helping people understand how that younger part of us is oftentimes the why driving so much of what we do, but we don't know it, and so therefore we're really not in charge of it. And so what does it look like to sort of take responsibility for that why, and then once again find a better why for that younger part of us?
Yeah, it's fascinating. I mean, there's so many things there to talk about, but that last part about, sort of that why from childhood, I guess it's funny because it's almost something that I feel like I sort of accidentally realized very, very recently. And I think it has a lot to do with just doing this podcast and talking to so many people and always asking them what their why is and all this. And in like a few years back, 4 or 5 years ago, I would never have even known to call something that. I would never have put that word to it, or, it's like you just have goals or whatever things you're
Right.
trying to accomplish. And it's now, I know sort of my why is very, very family driven, as it sounds like yours is. And then,
Yes.
growing, evolving towards having impact on a larger scale. But like what I started to think about is like probably my very early why was just escaping some of childhood issues,
That's
things
right.
like that. Like, and it's like you're just like, oh, I don't want to be there again. So you kind of, try to find your way out of it. And it's just a fascinating thing I mean, it wasn't a conscious thought that I had
Nope.
or anything. It's just like, but so the concept of that is amazing. And the letter to your daughter that sort of inspired it is, I guess I would have thought the same thing. I would have thought people would be like, oh, I'm going to write this letter to my daughter or son or whatever, I'm going to do this for them. And it's what I've realized with my kids is a lot of times I feel like as much as I try to avoid putting any of my,
Yes.
sort of baggage on them and stuff, I think sometimes almost you try so hard to not do it that you do it. I guess is
Absolutely. Yes.
probably
There's so much in what you've just said. This is like, so I just recently shared in my socials, I said, here's a new definition of adulthood. Adulthood is everything that we do to cope with our childhood, right? Like that there was this moment in childhood where we're like, this isn't feeling good anymore. This, and sometimes for some of us really early and some of us a little bit later, but this hurts. I don't want to feel it anymore. And I would argue that's the point at which sort of adulthood begins, where we start to, instead of being who we are, we start trying to protect who we are. and that adulthood is really, for a lot of us, is the collection of protections that we've created to keep that younger part of us safe.
Yeah.
And so the why, the hidden why and all that is, I want to feel safe and protected, and I don't want to get hurt anymore. I don't want to feel any more of that pain from childhood. And if instead we can sort of shift that why to, I want to live fully from that original part of me, from who I really am, with as few protections as possible. Now we're starting to talk about real freedom, right? And so I love what you acknowledged there, that a lot of it is just sort of trying not to feel any more of that. I think it's really important that we all know we had a moment where we did that.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's still still work in progress, certainly, but it's kind of,
For all of us.
yeah.
Which is why as you said, which is why we pass a lot of it on to our kids. So whenever, and really the concept that Lovable ended up focusing on is the experience of shame, which is the belief that we're not good enough the way we are to be loved and to belong to the people that we want to belong to, basically. And so when I start to talk about shame and the ways we accidentally send the messages or receive the messages that we're not good enough, like the parent, I can always see the parents like look of terror in their eyes in the audience going like, oh no, like, do I shame my children? And I always say, I got bad and good news. Bad news is, yes, you definitely shame your children. There's all sorts of ways we can accidentally do it. And I'll share a really subtle example to illustrate that if you want, but also one of the most shaming things we can do for our kids is sort of project an image of perfection to them. You know how hard it is for a kid to feel like their parents are perfect and that they've got to live up to that? Because they're on the inside of themselves going, I know I'm not perfect, right? But I got to somehow be like mom and dad who seems to be perfect. So the best thing a parent can do actually for a kid is just acknowledge they're not perfect and apologize for the ways they're not, and just sort of be aware that they passed some junk onto their kids. So that when the kids come back at 30 after me doing a little therapy and say, hey, you weren't the perfect parent, you can go, I know, I'm sorry, and what can I do to be even better right now? So anyways, but yeah, there's all sorts of ways we accidentally pass that on.
Would you sort of share, and you said you would share a subtle one?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is I share the story a little bit in Lovable, but it's a story that sort of comes more and more alive for me as I help more and more people and understand how this experience of shame happens for us originally. And so I'm like 5, 6 years old, in my, say, sort of the fall of my kindergarten year. I'm playing soccer for the first time in a youth soccer league. And as the legend goes in our family, like I wasn't even the kid who would roam around in the pack. I was the kid who stood in the center of the field and sort of turned on a dime and just watched it all happening.
Yeah.
And which was a little embarrassing for my dad, who was a multiple time state athlete, um, but then apparently the last game of the season, I started to run and I started to chase the ball. And not only that, I started to sort of like understand how to get to the ball before everybody else by anticipating where it would go. So my coach takes it on himself to go out and buy me a most improved player trophy and bring it to the house, right? And one of my first memories of my whole life is standing in our foyer with my coach there and my parents. And people are just awesome. I just remember this feeling of like, oh my gosh, they're all like admiring me and happy for me and recognizing me. And normally in our house, no one's paying attention to me at all. And so the irony in that moment is that what a kid is learning is when you just stand there and be yourself, no one's very interested in you, and maybe even we're a little embarrassed of you. But if you start running and chasing and achieving and accomplishing and winning, oh, we're all ears, we're all eyes for you. And that's a shameful message, right? That you're more worthy when you're running, chasing, achieving, and winning than when you're just being you. And so much of healing really is sort of reclaiming the original truth that we are worthy just the way we are without having to do anything. And if we can really rest in that, then all of our doing proceeds from a sense of worthiness rather than being sort of a chase for a sense of worthiness. And so now your why is very different, right? It's not, I'm trying to prove myself. I'm just getting to be myself, and this is a lot of fun.
Yeah, that's amazing. It's you mentioned that your wife, sort of is the more qualified child psychiatrist. The interesting
Yes.
thing is we I'm a veterinarian, my wife's a veterinary technician. In our house, she is like definitely the one that is my, sort of lighthouse of how to parent. She's
Mm-hmm.
doing all of she's reading books, she's kind of like really
Yeah.
putting a lot of work into it, and it is really like super inspiring to see, and it's and have that, like, but it's almost at the same time sometimes I'm just like, I'm not doing enough, I'm not, you know what I mean? Like
Mm,
you build up
yes.
this feeling of like how you want to be, at least I do, like I want to be the
Mm,
best possible dad I can and it's
yes.
like sometimes that even that's like an overwhelming, feeling
It is. Yeah.
of impossibility, right? Like it's impossible to be, the perfect parent. And so I think it's just kind of a
Yes.
interesting, even in my own house, I'm like, no, she's definitely better at this than me. Like there's no doubt she's better at this than me. And it's kind of like, she does most of the, she works some, but like is mostly home
Hmm.
with the kids, that kind of thing. And so and it's like, it's, we laugh about it, but it's like, if I'm home with them for a day without her, like that's, everybody's
Mm.
nervous about it, that it's going to be like, am I going to survive that day? And it's like, it always turns out
Everybody's
awesome.
nervous. Yes.
Like I always
Uh-huh.
love it, I'm
Yep.
always like, yeah, this is great. Like if I'm left on my own with the kids, it's always fun. Like I feel like but it's like that
That's
for
awesome.
whatever reason, my idea like built up in my head to be this like
Mm,
infallible parent. So I just,
that's good.
it's a long-winded way of saying, like, I like what you said about, sort of just being able to be ourselves and be human, and
Yes.
apologize to them when you're not having a good day and you lose
Yes.
your temper, and your patience, that kind of thing. I think um
Yes.
it's
And I can relate to that in the sense that, you know, when you feel like when you come out of your childhood feeling like you're not good enough, one of the most common protections against that feeling is to try to be infallible, to try to be
mhm,
perfect so that no one can criticize you again, right? And so when I feel like I'm giving 110% and my wife communicates in one way or another, I need a little more, I get really defensive because I feel like, well, listen, I've put in my day's work. I've proven to you, I'm doing the best I can. You're not allowed to need more from me, or you're not allowed to question, like,
yeah,
and there was even one time where we were in one of those cycles where she was asking for a little more of something, and I was getting defensive about it, where I literally like, I typed out everything I'd done that week for her and for the family, like almost like it was like like a an agenda for a business meeting. Like I had
yeah,
different fonts and I formatted and the right amount of white space on the page. And we got into bed, and I was in such a crazy protective mode that I actually thought this was going to work. I handed it to her. We got into bed and said, "I just want you to know this is what I've been doing this week." And guess what? That
here's
didn't
my
it didn't
list.
work. Yeah,
Yeah. Oddly enough, that does not
that's right.
fix the
Yeah,
problems when they're feeling that way.
this was a it was a poorly conceived solution. And and so yeah, so like so much and this can apply to wives and kids, and it can apply to our teams and the people that we're serving and the customers we're caring for and the clients we're taking care of. I mean, it can apply to anybody. Am I showing up primarily as my why to protect myself and preserve my reputation with you? Or am I trying to show up for my fullest, most authentic, most original self? Um, and the old stories that we have in our heads tell us that if we show up as our authentic, original self, it won't go as well. Um, But what we generally see over and over and over again is that when people have the bravery to do that, the courage to do that, all sorts of incredible things happen that wouldn't have happened if they were just in protection and self-preservation mode. So that's hopefully the why that is leading us whenever we're interacting with really anyone in our life that matters to us.
Yeah. Do you think that children in are inherently that way? Like they
Mm,
lead with their authentic selves, and then somehow life takes it away from them? Because I feel
good question.
like I when I watch my kids, like my son's 4.5, my daughter's 2, like
Mhm.
they're they're young, and I like they do things out in the world that, like, as a parent sometimes you might get embarrassed, and I every
That's right.
time am like, nope, just let them be themselves. Don't
Mm,
shut that stuff down, because to me
yeah.
it's amazing. Like it's amazing to be at that person in life that, like, it is able to just go out and be
Yes.
themselves, and like dance down the sidewalk or whatever, whatever it is they're
That's
doing.
right.
And it's like, so do you think that the kids,
Mhm.
that's how everybody starts that way, like being their authentic selves?
To me, that if there was, if I could pick the greatest gift of parenting just solely for myself, it was getting to watch human beings before they felt ashamed. Like to get to, as you said, 2 years old, 4 years old. So when I was on the Today Show, I had 3, 5, and 9. So my 9 year old was starting to enter into protection mode, like starting to already shift out of childhood, but my 5 and 9. So I got to watch these three incredible human beings come into the world. And as I write in Lovable, their worthiness is as natural and as given as eating animal crackers, right? Like it's just
Right.
like, yeah, this is who I am. Like, why would I question it? And then one of the interesting things, as you pointed out, we do as parents is we go out in the public with them and they do something, then we feel a little bit of embarrassment. And a lot of times we have very good motivation. The motivation is, oh my gosh, if you are still doing that by the time you get to kindergarten, the other kids are going to make so much fun of you,
Mhm.
right? So we try to protect them against future shame by, ironically, accidentally shaming them right now.
Yeah.
Like, well, we'll get you to stop being you so that other people won't make fun of you. And I think the reality is, as parents, if we can just stay in that place of supporting who they are and nurturing their unfolding, they are going to take hits out in the world. But then hopefully they feel comfortable enough to come home and go, that hurt. And you get to have a conversation about, yeah, it hurts when someone doesn't tell the truth about you. That's right. And if mom and dad ever don't tell the truth about you, it'll hurt too. You tell us. That was one of our rules with our kids growing up is if we ever do or say something that feels like it's not the truth about you, let us know. Because we want to give our kids the empowered voice to sort of respond to that shame. Now they're going to pick it up one way or another, and so we just want to sort of be that safe holding place when they do. I think.
Yeah, that I, you're exactly right. I mean, that's always the thing in my head, that I'm like, I do not want to, so I don't want to hold them back. I don't want to be that shaming influence in their life. But then I'm like, it's going to come sometime, and just figuring
Sure
out how
does.
to be
Yeah.
able to be that supportive, you know, person, or just supportive place in their lives that they can come back to, and realize that it is okay to be themselves. And
Exactly. I mean, I'll share something that feels like equally a win and a and an ouch as a parent. So our oldest now is he'll turn 20 in 2 weeks. He told us from about eighth grade on, I'm not going to college. School's for idiots. Like I don't have any interest in it, and I'm going to become a world famous comedian. Um, and he's been telling us that since eighth grade. So he graduated high school last year, and sure enough, he moved into Chicago and started taking classes at Second City. He's fully self-supporting. He's out there working full time at Trader Joe's to pay the bills, and then taking comedy classes on the weekends. So that's a win for me in the sense that he knew it was okay to be himself. Now there's a part of me that's like, oh my gosh, I wish you were what, doing something a little bit more conventional with a few more guarantees,
Yeah,
because this terrifies me. But I think as parents, we manage our anxieties enough to really support and let him be who he wanted to be. Now, on the other hand, he has ADHD, and I have the opposite of ADHD, really high executive functioning. And so one of the consistent messages he got from me in his childhood was just exasperation with his disorganization, his lack of follow through on something, and just generally being disruptive. Um, so he comes home after one of the early months, off living on his own. He says, "Dad, I'm wrestling with some anxiety just when I'm walking around in the city." And I was like, "Well, what is it?" He says, "I don't know, but I just keep thinking I don't want to be a disturbance to people. I keep shrinking so I don't, get in people's way and disturb them." And I said to him, I said, "Dude, I think that's part of the shame that at least I in part passed on to you was that you were a disturbance to me. When you messed up, when you forgot things, when you didn't plan things, when that you were a disturbance to our life, um, and you know, I feel sorry for every time I did that. I can't undo it, but I do want you to know I think you're the best kind of disturbance. Like you are a disturber, and I want you to go out in the world and disturb people with your comedy, get them thinking." And but and it wasn't just me. I mean, it was every teacher he ever had, telling him he's a disturbance and needs to go sit out in the hallway and all of that. Um but yeah, like it's going to be a mixed bag probably for all of us parents. There's going to be some wins in nurturing, our kids to feel safe to be who they are, and there's going to be some ouches there where we didn't we'd like to take it back, but we can't. So we just have to own it.
yeah, yeah. And I guess the awareness, you're you're able to talk about these things, kind of in the past that happened. But I think
Mhm.
someone like yourself, kind of
Mm.
sharing these stories, writing your books, your blog, all of that, we we can hopefully look at those things and
Mhm.
say, oh, because I mean, as you're telling me that story, I was immediately like, crap, I think I do that. Like my
Mm.
son, he gets
Sure.
homework, right? He just
Yeah.
started transitional kindergarten. It's like not even regular kindergarten yet. He gets homework and it's like trace these letters or color in. It's like it's basic stuff. It in my mind, it takes him forever because he doesn't
Uh,
focus on it. And I've always been that like just get stuff done, get it out of the way. And I'm like,
mhm.
hey, bud, you want me to help you with your homework? And apparently in my head, what I'm really thinking is, do you want me to get you through this homework faster? And it's
Yes, right.
like, instead, you saying that immediately makes me think, well, doing that wrong. All right. I gotta
Uh,
step back and just let
well,
him do his work and at his pace.
and if I mean, we're talking about like sort of complicated sort of inner things here going, but if I had like one hack, like to make this practical for people and for myself earlier on, it would have been this idea that we can actually feel our protections kicking in our body, usually somewhere between our stomach and our forehead. Um, Michael Singer, author of Untethered Soul, he calls it your heart closing. You can feel your heart closing, and what that is that you're starting to protect the ego you've created to protect you. That wonderful, awe-inspiring creation. It's kicking in, um, and so if I could go back, the thing that would have made the biggest difference to my parenting would have been if I could have just practiced moment to moment awareness of when am I feeling that tight thing starting to happen in my chest? What is the experience I'm not wanting to feel in the moment? And how am I about to try to control one of the kids to manage my own emotions right now? I need you to get your homework done faster so I can be calm again and feel like your future is bright,
Yeah.
right? Or I need you, the thing that we had to manage with Aiden, I need you to go to college because it's just so much more controlled and structured, and I don't have to wonder for all the lies we tell ourselves about how college is going to be a better outcome.
Yeah.
Like I need you to do something to help me calm down inside instead of just slowing down, putting my hand over my where I can feel my heart closing, my protection's kicking in, and learning to soothe and manage that emotion myself. Um, I think that's the most powerful thing that we can do to give our kids a chance at feeling like they get to be themselves. Anything that we do to say, hey, you need to behave, do X, Y, or Z so that I can feel calmer, more hopeful, more confident about you, usually doesn't, it's not serving them. And I did an awful lot of that. These days, when one of those moments kicks in, I try to notice it happening. And so my daughter and my middle guy are getting a little bit better, a little bit better reactions from dad these days.
And I guess, I mean, you mentioned sort of, I don't know if you're literal about this, like hand on heart kind of to feel is,
Sure.
that was gonna be my next question. Like, how do you suggest people, obviously the first step is just being aware of it, like realizing,
Yeah.
and it's like, it might take me a time or two of being like, here, just use it. But then I
Right.
generally figure it out, that it's happening. But I guess I definitely don't feel like I'm well equipped
Mm.
to stop myself from being that, sort of in that
Yeah.
instance, like the rushing influence.
Yeah. So heading into 2021, I made my New Year's resolution. Sort of my goal for the year was to notice as often as I can, notice my heart closing and try to open it back up. And, we're what, 2.5 years later, and it's really become the central practice of my life with my kids, with my wife. Um, like when I sit down to write, when I'm in any interaction with somebody out in the world, when I'm walking all by myself and a thought pops in and I feel myself tighten up, it's become the central practice. So I'll illustrate it with a quick story here. It's probably like, I guess this was maybe last summer sometime. Now, once I started practicing this noticing of my heart closing and trying to open it back up, my my life changed dramatically. Because when you open your heart back up, what you're doing is you're allowing that original self, right? You're allowing, if you want to call it your soul or your true self, to be expressed. And I realized I was doing all sorts of things with my life I didn't want to do once I could get my heart back open. So I closed my brick and mortar therapy practice and I shifted entirely into online coaching of entrepreneurs. I quit writing nonfiction and I started writing fiction, which I've been wanting to do since I was about 6 years old. It's been one of the greatest professional joys of my life. Um, but one of the ramifications of that is that it was a Tuesday afternoon. And instead of being off managing my team at my therapy practice, I was home, working from home. And my last coaching client canceled. And I called my wife up at work and I said, hey, I know that you were going to take Quinn to soccer practice, but I just had a cancellation. I'll take him and you can finish up at work. And she's like, oh, thank you so much. That's amazing. So I take Quinn to soccer practice. I pull back in the driveway. She's pulling in from work. And I said, hey, I got some notes to finish up. Do you want me to get us a glass of wine and we'll sit in the back deck and finish our notes? And she's like, oh my gosh, that's awesome. Thank you. Yeah, that'd be great. That sounds lovely. So we do that. 6 o'clock rolls around. Hey, I know you were supposed to get Quinn from soccer practice, but you got dinner to cook. Why don't I go get him? Oh yeah, thank you so much. That's so thoughtful. So I go get Quinn from soccer practice, and I'm feeling like I am just hitting grand slams as a husband, right? Like, I mean, a few months ago, I'd have been 75 miles away, paying attention to other people. Here I am. And so I come back in from bringing Quinn home, and she's cooking, and I sit at the island and I say, hey, um, do you, is this a good time to ask you about my launch team? Because my novel was about to release. And she turns and she looks at me. She goes, do you ever stop thinking about work? And I could just boom, like I could just feel my heart, just my chest, like slam shut. Like, what the? Are you kidding me? After the afternoon I just put in, like, and so I said to her literally, I said, well, that was really, and she, we were clear that we're both working at keeping our hearts open in our relationship. So I said, hey, and that we are taking responsibility for our own heart, not telling the other person what to do, right? So, because that's just telling another person to open their heart is you closing your own
Right.
in disguise. So I say, hey, that was really triggering. I'm gonna go lay down in the other room, take a few deep breaths, and I'll come back when I'm ready to show up for you the way that you deserve. She just turns around. I thought I'd be back before the green beans were done boiling. It took me a day and a half. It took me a day and a half to get my heart open enough again to be able to show up the way that she deserved. What I was doing in the other room and what I did for a day and a half periodically is put my hand over. It's really important to put your hand over that space where you feel it, to actually make physical contact with that tightening sensation. That in and of itself helps you to sort of move toward that energy rather than wanting to move away from it. And then I do an exercise where, and I coach the folks I work with, where we start with some deep breathing, and then we begin to imagine and visualize taking the breath into that space. Actually, the first thing we do is visualize the emotion that you're feeling in that tight spot. And it's remarkable the different, it's like a black sun, or it's a black hole, or it's a white hot star, or it's a jagged, like red, sphere. Um, and then we start to do the breathing, and instead of trying to breathe into that tight spot and get rid of it, we actually just are trying to practice staying with the feeling rather than eliminating it, because it'll come back if you don't learn to stay with it. So when you visualize that air coming into that space underneath your hand, picture it just surrounding and creating a little bit of space around that sort of black ball of gunk, we'll call it. Okay, now breathe out. Take another breath in, breathe a little more space around that black ball of gunk. And what you discover is that within a relatively short time, usually, not for me, it took a day and a half that time, but that's just telling you how big the wound is there, right? That you still haven't healed if it takes you a day and a half. But usually, relatively quickly, you can go, okay, do you still have the feeling? Yes. Do you feel okay with the feeling? Can you stay with it? Is there some spaciousness around it? Can you feel that feeling and feel a little peaceful? Yeah. Okay. All right. Now you're present to it. Now we get to work at opening that feeling, that space back up. Right. For me, after a day and a half, what I was able to identify is that it was so humbling. I still see my wife like a vending machine. Right. Um, I, I'm home. I went and took a kid to practice. I poured you a glass of wine. We had a good chat, and I got a kid from practice. And now you should just think I'm the most amazing husband who's perfectly attentive and never distracted by his work, right? Which
Right.
is so humbling to be like, there, I was doing it again. I thought I could control her reactions to me. So it's super easy to come back and be like, that was totally unfair of me to try to control your reactions and expect that I'd get just what I want from you. You got all sorts of things going on inside of you. It's not fair to think I can make you respond a certain way to me. Um, which, by the way, when a spouse starts to get those reactions from you, they suddenly become a lot more tender towards you because they don't feel like they have to defend their reactions anymore, right? So that's just sort of a practical example of what it looks like on the ground to be going, uh-oh, my protections are kicking in. This is how I'm going to take responsibility for them. So I'm going to be vulnerable about them once I get through it. And rinse and repeat over and over and over again, because that's what it's going to take.
Yeah. Yeah. I imagine that's an ongoing, ongoing work that sort of never ends. I mean, it is fascinating to talk about these things, and like in like everything you're saying, I think about immediately like examples in my head. I'm like, oh, like, and this is like a silly similar example, but like there was like a couple weeks ago, kids were playing, and one one of my kids was like climbing across my lap. The other one was trying to like push them off my lap, and eventually like my son kind of pushed my daughter. My daughter's the 2-year-old, but she is fierce, and she got mad, picked up a Matchbox car and whipped it at my son. Well, it missed my son, hit me in the head, like just, and she's
Oh
shockingly
yeah.
strong for a 2-year-old. And I was just like, it's like that,
Mhm.
in that rage when you stand up and hit your head on like a cabinet door or something like that, and you're just like, can't I like had to
Yes.
leave the
Oh
room.
yeah.
I was like, I just have to leave the room right
Yes.
now,
Yeah.
because I was just like, I'm so furious with what just happened that I'm like, have to. But it's
Yeah.
so it's like you're telling these techniques, and I'm like, okay, next time, I hope to not get hit in the head with another Matchbox car. But like things
Right.
like that, like those are good tools to have, in whether it's
Yeah.
spouse, children, coworkers, whatever the case may be. The 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 closing of your heart, description of it makes total sense. You do feel it. You do feel those things happen, that tightness. I mean,
Yeah.
and usually, well, I don't know. Usually, I guess what I do is not deal with it. Like, just squish it down there, squish it down there, and hope,
Try to squish it down.
make sure, hope it doesn't come
Yes.
back again. But like, I think
That's right.
that's been my technique for so long. But
Yeah.
but then but then it gets released at the wrong times. And so I I I'm
Mm,
so happy, that you've shared these, like, almost putting a description or a name to it, but then also like,
yeah.
this is what you can do in those moments. Because I just think so many people,
Yeah.
again, whether it's work or spouse or kids, whatever the case may be, like, being able to center yourself, and maybe it will take a
Yes.
day and a half at first, or several days, or and as the more you work on it, the more it's going to be, I guess, become second nature.
Well, and I think the example you gave, it's really masterful what you did there, because there's the wounds that we're protecting from childhood, but there's also like we're wired. I mean, when we get hit in the face, we're biologically wired to react strongly to that. I mean, if you lost your eyesight, you know, 5,000 years ago, it was over,
Right.
right? And so like we are wired that if there's a threat to the face in particular, to really respond to that. But more often than not these days, it's not sort of existential threats that we're tightening up against. It's more those emotional threats. And and yeah, so I think that's a really powerful example of sometimes like when a kid runs into the road and you feel yourself tighten up, right? And you react, yeah, okay. Now they're standing next to you and you have that moment where you're like, oh my God, thank goodness you're safe. And then
Yeah.
that emotional surge of frustration comes. Don't you ever do that again.
Yeah.
That's where now we're protecting our emotions rather than
Yeah.
our physical well-being. Yeah.
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 Yeah. It's, again, like,
I'll give you yeah.
you say
Yeah. And
that, and
you,
I'm
you
like,
said something, but go ahead.
sorry,
Go
immediately,
ahead.
like,
Yeah.
immediately an example like this. My son, like, we have a storage unit. My son likes to go to the storage unit with me. So it's up a set of stairs, there's a hallway, and I said, he couldn't, we had like bags, luggage. He's like, I can't carry this up the stairs. And I'm like, okay, you stand right here at the top of the stairs, do not move. And I walked down the
Mm,
7 stairs, turned around, picked up the bag, and he was gone. And I was like, lost my
yeah.
mind, like, internally, and I was just like, Logan, like,
Yep.
scream for him. He had like gone around the corner of one of these, in this, storage
Mhm.
buildings are like just these long hallways basically. And I just, yeah, that what you just described, that whole thing happened, where it was just like, first you're just, gotta find him, you're panicked, then you find him, and
Right.
then you're just mad slash like, almost, I was like on the
That's
verge of
right.
tears, because I was just like, so much had happened that I
Yes.
was like, if I
Yes.
actually lost you, like, that would be the worst thing I can
Yes.
imagine. And so it's like, all of that like takes place in a span of like 30 seconds, and you're just overwhelmed. And it was like the,
Well, yes. And you said earlier, you got like that. We talked about how adulthood is sort of resisting getting any more of that pain from childhood, and so like in that moment, that what you're experiencing is I'm resisting experiencing the loss of my child. So yes, like I'm going to do whatever I can to not feel like what that would be like to lose a child, even though you notice some of it in the background there, tears, right? Like you were actually feeling what it would be like to lose your child,
yeah,
but then Your anxiety and your anger were reactions to that, efforts to try to not experience that loss. And the challenge, I mean, hopefully nothing so dire ever happens, but the challenge for each of us is to be able to fully experience whatever is in front of us before we decide what to do with it, right? Um, because usually our reaction is, I don't want to experience what's in front of us. And so I'm going, or in front of me. So I'm going to react in this way so I don't have to fully experience. Now our why is, I don't want this to be happening to me. But we can have a deeper why if we can go, okay, I can handle this experience. I can soothe myself through it. I can be okay. Now I get to decide how I want to respond to this from a much deeper, wiser place than just, I don't want to feel it, if that makes sense. You also mentioned squishing it down, which I think is a really profound, actually, squishing is a great word for it. And I think of, it makes me think specifically, we all know this example, Will Smith and Chris Rock. Okay. I finished Will Smith's memoir the day of the Oscars, and was really sort of antsy at the conclusion of it because he suggested that that angry protective part of him that he calls the general, that he had gotten rid of it. He said, I did 14 ayahuasca ceremonies, I read all the right books, I've done all the spiritual retreats. He goes, it's basically implied it's gone. And I thought, you can't eliminate a part of yourself. It's always there with you. All we can do is be aware when it wants to assert itself and then make wise decisions about what to do with it, right? Thought, well, okay, I hope that doesn't come back to bite you well. And then literally, right, a few hours later, it plays out and he feels that part of him surge up, but because he thinks it's not there anymore, because he tried to squish it back down, so to speak, he didn't have the awareness to make a wise decision about it. And so I think so much of health and our growth and our integration is about going, yeah, I got it all. I got that original part of me. I got the part of me that feels ashamed, and I got all the protective parts. And instead of squishing them down, rejecting them, trying to get rid of them, wishing they weren't a part of me, I learn how to be present to them and experience them, and then make wise decisions based upon what I'm learning from them. And it takes a lot of awareness in the moment, but that tightness is a good place to start in terms of bringing awareness to it.
Yeah. Man, literally talk about this all day long. I don't want to keep you all day. Thank you. Thank you so much for all of this. I think it's going to be, people can get so much value out of this. I want to make sure that, wherever is best for people to reach out to you, obviously, reading your books,
Yeah.
but what do you want to, or what's the best place to kind of get a hold of you or find your materials?
Yeah, absolutely. A few places come to mind. My website is drkellyflanagan.com, drkellyflanagan.com. All A's in Flanagan and single N's. And then right now I'm actually I'm writing a book in public about this very topic. This original self, the shamed self, and then the protective self. And I'm writing it on Substack. So you can go to drkellyflanagan.substack.com and follow along for free. And then the other thing that comes to mind is just to find me in socials. I'm Dr. Kelly Flanagan everywhere, Dr. Kelly Flanagan, and you can find me wherever, whatever platform that you're on. Lovable is a book that addresses a lot of this. And then my first novel, which you can see, I think, right over the shoulder here, The Unhiding of Elijah Campbell. It gets specifically to that issue of the squishing you talked about, squishing everything down and just trying to pretend it's not there. And it does it in a story format that is really compelling. I've had a lot of entrepreneurial guys who have never read a novel read it and say, dude, tried through the last 20 pages. That was amazing. I'm a better man. So if you want to be a better man, go check that out too.
I do.
Or a better woman, I think whoever, for the women listening, I think it's equally out for that.
Yeah. Fantastic. And we'll definitely put all of that in the show notes. I can't thank you enough. I think this was an amazing conversation. for me personally, but I think also, listeners will get a lot of value out of this, and just, even in this short time, that some of the techniques you described, some of the experiences you shared, I think, kind of can help us all, whether it be a better man or woman, be a better parent, just get in touch with our own authentic selves. I do appreciate so much you coming and sharing all this and being on the show.
It's really my pleasure. It's every time I get to talk about it, it freshens it for me, and I'll be probably a better husband and dad today because of it. So thank you.
There you go. There you go. Well, to the listeners, I know you're going to love this one. Please like, rate, and review the show so we can get more great guests like Dr. Flanagan. And thank you all so much for listening.
I'd like to show you why knowing your why is the start of your journey. Without a strong why, it can be so difficult to reach your maximum potential. My name is Dr. Jason Ballara, and every week I meet with real estate investors and mindset specialists that are taking action in order to build a life according to their own terms. We will break down what drives successful people and allows them to achieve at such a high level. If you are a professional wanting to break through, or simply someone that wants to hear an inspiring story, the Know Your Why podcast is made for you.